there was no treatment, nothing you could do, you'd be dead by 30. And I was like, oh, that's great. Let me, go into science so I can figure out a way to, help myself.
Something, right? And I know there's other people out there trying, but you know what they say, if you want something done right, you gotta do it yourself.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Rare As Us podcast. I'm your host, Noah Griffith, and today we're here joined by two researchers in the FA field at the University of Florida, Chandra Trantham and Christian Mauzet. Now, this leads us into a new segment, talking with different people in the FA community about their careers and how that mixes with FA. In my personal experience, choosing a career was extremely difficult because, especially being diagnosed at the end of high school, I was forced to look into the future really quickly after my diagnosis, which was just something I was not ready to do. And having to quit sports, which was something I'd spent so many years on, to put that to the side really quickly. And that led me to community college. And then after I left community college, it was really just, I had to jump into something. I jumped into journalism quickly. I just had to jump into my career as a journalist. And as we talked about in episode 2, the sports episode, I just found my way to stay involved in what I was passionate in. And it eventually all came together, but it was a very trying process. I really didn't even have to think much about where to start this segment because Chandra and Christian do incredible work at researching FA at the University of Florida, and they're not only on the advocacy and patient side of FA, they're on the researching side. So they're researching to possibly cure their own disease, which is incredible. And they're doing great work. And so we are so glad to have Chandra and Christian today. And let's get to it. Today we have with us guest Christian Mauzet and Chandra Trantham, who are both in their PhDs in genetics and genomics at the University of Florida. And we are so happy to have you guys back. How are y'all doing?
Great. I'm super excited to be back here.
Back for round 2, and Christian's with us for the first time here. So glad to have you guys. Every time I go down for my clinical trial visits at the University of Florida, I see these guys. They are rock stars and they are incredibly bright and have a great future in their career fields. And so it really wasn't a hard decision where I wanted to start for this new segment. Because these guys are doing such impactful work in their fields. And so first is, can you guys tell me a little bit about how your diagnosis journey led you to get involved in this career field? And neither one of you could go first.
I'll let ladies go first.
Oh, thank you. So when I was diagnosed, I remember looking it up online, trying to figure out what I could do to help me get better. And it said there was no treatment, nothing you could do, you'd be dead by 30. And I was like, oh, that's great. Let me go into science so I can figure out a way to help myself. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I got on the path that I was on. And then in college, I realized there's so much good research going on already. And so it's not I need to lead a crusade to figure it out because there's all these other people working on it. Mm-hmm. And I found out that one of the fields that's would be really important to finding a treatment for FA is genetics. So I wanted to do a PhD program in genetics so I could learn as much as I could to hopefully help the effort to finding a treatments for FA.
Yeah. And the first episode you were on was the Rare Disease Day episode when the day when FA got his first approved cure. And so, how does that feel like after all these years in the field? FA finally got his first treatment.
It's pretty amazing. Like, it feels like I'm kind of like cheating though, because I went on the trial
Yeah,
just like you have. So
yeah,
I've had access to this medicine, but it's still so exciting that everyone finally can take it.
it is. It's a great breakthrough. And Christian, um, can you tell us a little bit about how your diagnosis led you to the work you're doing now?
For sure, for sure. So my diagnosis story is a little interesting. So I have a twin sister named Isabel Mojay as well, and she actually had symptoms. It was difficult for her to run and do sporting events like soccer or like tennis or cheerleading and dance. She did all that. And then she started having difficulty doing those things at around the age of 8 years old. And then at first, obviously, everyone's like, oh, it's no big deal. Like, she's just clumsy. And then my parents were like, I think it's a little bit more than that. So then we got her diagnosed by a neurologist in 2008. And then subsequently, I was diagnosed genetically with the same disease in 2008. So we were about 9. But it was actually in the very beginning of 2008 for her. So she was still 8. And then by the time we were both 9, I was diagnosed as well. So I didn't really have symptoms of the disease physically until I was around 14 years of age. And up until that point, I'd always been very fascinated and captivated by very small things because they're very intricate and small. I thought that was very cool. So if you had asked me before that point, what do you want to do in your life? I would have told you, oh, I want to get a bachelor's in biology, and then I want to get a master's in zoology and a PhD in entomology. And then in my freshman year of high school, we started learning about it was sort of a glimpse into cell biology and this molecular world. And I was just caught off guard because I was like, what? There's things even smaller than insects? Like, I need to study that. And so around that time is also when I started having my symptoms of like difficult walking and like bad gait and balance. And so it just happened to coincide at the same time. And I was like, wow, I should really just go ahead and study this avenue and then even more so geared towards my disease. And then I went to undergraduate studies at the University of South Florida.
Mm,
Chandra was also there. That's where we got introduced. We both actually got the same bachelor's degree, bachelor's in cellular and molecular biology. And then she told me, oh, I'm going to this genetics program at UF. It's really cool. And then I graduated and I was like, well, I want to do that. It sounds cool. So I essentially followed Chandra. So Chandra is the pathway maker. I'm just someone following in the yellow brick road that she's laid down.
yeah. But y'all see what I mean? It's a no-brainer to share this amazing story. I mean, what are the odds to people with FA that's already a rare disease at the same college, studying in the same line of study to possibly cure their own disease? Like, that's pretty amazing. And this is interesting. It doesn't really have to do with your career field as much, but you and your sister have very different paths of, progression. And when your FA started to onset, can you just talk about that a little bit and about the differences in the onset of FA for you two?
So again, I don't know how sciencey you want me to go, but essentially Production is regulated by the amount of frataxin that you produce, and studies have been done. They showed the number of repeats are negatively correlated with protein production for frataxin. So my sister has more repeats than I do,
Mm,
and her smaller allele. So ergo, she underproduces more frataxin than I do. So she's at more of a disadvantage than I am molecularly. Um, that is why we are both so different. A lot of people will often say, "Oh, but you're twins."
yeah.
Okay, but we're not identical twins. So it doesn't really matter that we're twins. She's just my sibling genetically. She could be 8 years old or 2 years younger. It doesn't really matter. We're two separate zygotes versus identical twins. That's when a single egg breaks apart and then forms two people. For me and my sister, it just so happened two separate eggs were fertilized, and then both individuals are different in and of themselves. So we have different genetics,
Yeah.
which actually is why she is more progressed than I am because her genetics are different than mine.
Yeah. I'm guessing that played into your fascination with the um study as well. How does FA motivate you to be like to find out more and be more curious about your studies?
So I would say it helps motivate me to keep doing stuff even when things don't work because
Yeah.
I'm facing the reality of like nothingness. So it's like, oh, well, even if I do something that's not that great, it's better than nothing, right? So it helps galvanize me to push forward and keep doing my work and keep learning everything I can because someone's got to do something, right? And I know there's other people out there trying, but you know what they say: if you want something done right, you gotta do it yourself. I'm not saying I'll do it better than those people, but I'll say I would like to give it my best effort.
Mm. Take it
That's
into
true.
your own hands a little bit. Yeah, Sandra.
Yeah, I was gonna say for me, like, I feel like it motivates me to keep learning more because as new things come out about FA, if I'm like, hey, I don't really know about that, like, it motivates me to go and learn more. And I feel like, because of FA, I'm like on top of like learning and reading, and like it helps in what I do in school, like, and I'm doing it because I want to learn about FA.
And you're involved on both sides of the research. You're in the clinical trial labs and you're in the lab doing your own research. So what is that like to be on both
Uh-uh.
sides of it?
It like honestly, it makes me understand like as a patient, you want everything to happen as fast as possible, and it can be frustrating being like, they said gene therapy, for example, will come out in 2 years and it's been like 5 years. Where is it? Like that's
Mhm.
like a patient perspective. But as a researcher, like I understand why things get delayed like that. And like it's actually really important that when there are delays, they happen because it means that like it's not, the technology is not ready to go in humans yet, and we'd much rather it be like safe and effective and ready to go in people rather than like getting something out as fast as possible that doesn't work well.
Yeah. And one thing that's really cool about you, I think, is that you can kind of put things that are really scientific and hard to understand in like more general terms for the FA community to understand. And um because you have both of those viewpoints on the new research. What are some main takeaways you've had from your years in the lab, in research?
My main takeaways from being in the lab, like I said before, it was like understanding that things take time. I think that's a huge takeaway.
Yep.
Um another takeaway, I guess, would be that like I really understand more the whole process of getting a drug from like discovering it in cells in a dish all the way to people and all the steps that it goes through. And I understand more of like, I guess like what, like I'm able to understand what each of the drugs being developed does and like how it works. And I think that that has changed my perspective on like what clinical trials I want to do and which ones I'm most excited about, things like that. And I
Mm,
think having that perspective has been really cool.
yeah. And so, Christian, what clinical trials have you been involved in over the years?
So over the years, they evade me. I don't completely remember all of them.
Yeah.
I was in one Actimmune, which is interferon gamma. I was in another one, which is Rushatope, which is the drug RT001. Most recently, I was a part of the what is it? In this drug called Tadfradaxin, or not Tadfradaxin. It's oh Lord. I don't know. The drug is DT216.
Yeah.
The name evades me. I have no idea what it is called now. Yeah, I think so far in my lifetime, I've been in 4 clinical trials or
Mm.
5,
And so,
maybe.
how does being in research yourself help inform those decisions you make on what trials you're in?
Yeah. So, like John just said, the current literature is very important because it's very good to know all these things. And so I think it helps carry me towards what study I want to do. Um, but it's interesting because there's also somewhat of a dilemma because in theory, all these drug studies like should work, right? Like their theoretical basis of the drug or the trial targets something that isn't working and theoretically it would work. So it's very hard, even as a researcher that knows a lot and can see all this stuff. So I have to do like the biggest takeaways. So like what raises the frataxin level the most? How long is the drug in the system? Are there any negative side effects that could occur because of the drug? It's definitely very touch and go no matter what because it in it it is very exploratory. So there's lots of open-ended questions still.
Mm.
So there are not answers. So even though my questions are more sophisticated, they're still not answered. So it's very just what I'm feeling and what's available.
I have had experiences where like people in my lab will be like, I hear them off in the distance, like asking each other a question about FA. And I'm like, oh, and like I just tell them the answer because to me it's like common knowledge
Yeah.
living with FA. Like, for example, someone was like, what's the like example? Someone was like, what's the carrier rate of FA? And I'm like, oh, it's 1 in 125. Like, that's a stupid question. But like, I only know that because like I have FA, you know what I mean?
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. And like I said, because you're on both sides of the research, you can very easily make those connections between your
Yeah.
findings and your experiences. And so can you kind of both of you can talk about this a little bit, but can you take us through maybe a day in the life, or what's a typical day like for you in the lab?
I can say, typically I wake up around 7 or 7:30, and then I walk my dog, and then I go to work. Um, and then I'll either do cell culture work or computer work and answer emails and stuff. and then I go back and I do a little bit more work, and then I eat food, and then I go back and I do um a little bit more. I think right now I am actually moving out of the laboratory and more so doing bioinformatics with the data that I have collected, which basically means just sitting at a computer and typing and being boring. And then after work, I come home and walk my dog, and then I eat and go to bed. It's very touch and go, I guess. It's
Mm,
boring. I think also throw in there every now and again, or every week rather, and every other week sometimes for some, but therapies like physical or occupational or speech. So I'll either come into work late at around like 9 a.m. or I'll leave early at around like 4:30 and then go and do those things.
mm,
Um, Definitely balancing act
mm,
because you also have to plan your experiments around your doctor's appointments.
mm-hmm. And
That
I
is
know I've heard you say before it's everything's on a very strict schedule. Like you don't get a lot of time after holidays or you don't get a lot of days off like other students might.
Um, so actually I think we only have the days of holidays off.
Mm,
That's it. Um, so much so that during Christmas I couldn't go home because I was doing something called titer for viruses. I don't know if anyone listening knows about that, but I couldn't go home because I was still doing it over the break, and I even went in on Christmas Eve and I collected some data. Thankfully, I didn't have to go on Christmas Day because they were still growing. But you're very bound to the schedule of your research
mm,
rather than your research being bound to your schedule. So I'm a little bit more rigid in terms of doing spontaneous things that are not planned because I'm like, although I would love to do a spontaneous thing that is not planned, everything in my life is planned because it has to be planned around
mm,
science. So, yeah.
mm. And where are some you talk about being planned your schedule being planned around your experiments. What are some of the cool experiments that you've done in your studies?
Um, so I'll let y'all know that for first 2 years of my PhD, I was actually in a different laboratory than I am now when I actually joined a different laboratory and now I study Friedreich's ataxia. So I would say both the reason I say that is because both of these labs are very different. The first lab I was in was a mouse genetics laboratory versus the lab that I'm in right now is a toxicology laboratory. But I'm not doing anything with toxicology. I'm just using their really cool methods to study FA. I would say the coolest thing that I've done is probably grow stem cells into heart cells of the FA patients because you get to see them like beat in the petri dish.
Mm,
So I think that's really cool. Uh, that's probably the coolest thing that I've done.
yeah, that's awesome. What about you, Sandra? Is there anything that stands out to you they've done over the years?
Um, I mean, I think so. I'm like a gene therapy researcher, and
Mm,
so I think the coolest thing for me has been like from scratch. I like have created gene therapy. I work on a different neurological disease, but like I designed it and had it built in pieces and then put the pieces together. And then have put it in the virus that carries it into the body and then like injected it, not personally, but like we had our vet person inject it into mice and then we tested the response in the mice and like I just think it's the coolest thing that like gene therapy is something that like we we hear about happening for FA, and it's like some mystical like thing, and then like I've actually like made it literally, and like so I don't know, it's cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um, and how promising do you feel like gene therapy is? They've gotten to firsthand see it happen. What do you feel like could be the result of it?
I mean, honestly, I feel like for like every disease has its own challenges and advantages. In terms of gene therapy, like where you need to get the treatment to. So, for example, like a nervous system disease, you need to get it to like the brain, the spinal cord. Whereas like a blood disease, you just need to get it to blood. So that's an example of like a challenge or advantage. Um, and so like we have cases in other diseases where like it's either worked really well or it's really hard. And the thing is like for FA, we just don't know if it's gonna work really well or be really difficult because we haven't like we haven't really tested it at all in people yet. Like they've started the cardiac trials, but there's like not formally any data out from those yet.
Hmm.
And we just don't know like what it's gonna do. And like I wish I could say that because of my experience, I can predict like it'll work really well or something like that. But truthfully, I have no idea because there's just no data on it.
Yeah. Okay, so just like me at Auburn University, these guys are navigating a pretty big campus at Florida as well. And so I know for me, it can be a challenge to get around at times and to, quite parking on a campus is absolutely insane. So I know you mentioned you go on and off campus quite a bit in your day. So how are you able to get around campus and kind of keep up with the busy schedule?
I mean, I know for me, like in undergrad college, like I was walking unassisted slash I had a cane for a bit. Um, but when I applied for UF and I came here for like the interviews, I saw the campus and I was like, I know if I get in here, there's no way I can walk around this place. And then I got in, so I was like, all right, I guess I have to get a walker. And so I got a walker, and that's allowed me to be able to get around where I need to go, mostly. But the problem for me is that my lab is like part of the hospital, and there's like no parking near the hospital unless you're a patient or you're a fancy doctor who will pay like $1,000 a year for a parking pass, and like I'm neither of those people. So I like struggled with trying to get a parking spot closer to the hospital where I worked for years, and they just wouldn't budge on it. So I've started using this like transport bus. So I'll go and park like far away, and then I scheduled a bus to get me from my car and take me to work every day. And like it's a little slash a lot annoying, but it's better than like having to struggle to walk all that way, which I did when I first got there, and it was like it could take me like 30 minutes to get from my car into work, and it was just ridiculous.
And so did you walk independently while you were at USF?
Yeah.
Was that like a lot more accessible of a campus for you?
It was a lot smaller of a campus, and also like you could park like basically outside of every building.
Mm.
So even when I was like starting to struggle a lot more with walking, like I could just drive to my classes and like it would be fine. But UF, like it's more than like a mile across in like each direction, I think. So it's crazy.
Mm, that's pretty much how it was for me. When I went to community college, I could drive to the building and there was like a little walkway, but I was doing pretty good with walking at the time. But then when I got to Auburn, I started using the giant golf cart systems that you give them your schedule and they take you to your building at your assigned time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's a mix of having the parking permit to get on campus and then taking that to where I need to go. So, Christian, would you say that's about what your experience is the same as Chandra's?
No, so I would say our stories have become very night and day. The reason I say become is because if you remember, I told you that I was in a different lab for the first 2 years of my PhD, and that laboratory was right across from where Chandra worked. So I faced the same conundrum of there never being parking or having to park very far away. So, like Chandra, I walked without a device all throughout undergrad. Chandra said she had a cane, I had nothing. And even in my first year of my PhD, I could still walk without a walking device. But now I use a walker to walk. And in my new lab, I there was a handicap spot right in front of where I work.
Mm,
Right. So I would just use that all the time. And then recently, like 2 months ago, I would say, someone decided to start parking in my parking spot. It's not my parking spot, but everyone in my mat was lit. Everyone in my lab was livid because they were like, "That's your parking spot." So it became my unassigned assigned parking spot. So Dr. Volpe said, "Oh." Well, what Dr. Volpe is my PI or my boss. He said, "Oh, well, why don't you just get a permanent reserve spot put in next to the handicap?" And I said, "Well, back when I worked in the other lab by where Chandra works, I tried to get them to install a permanent reserve parking spot, but we can't because we're students." So I told him that, and Dr. Volpe said, "I don't care. I will have one put in." So he contacted the board at VetMed and he had them install a reserve parking spot for me. And also recently, they've installed the handicap push buttons to open the doors automatically where I work because that was not something that was there before because the ADA Act is still pretty new, right? It was passed in like 1999. The building where I work is like old. Um, so they didn't really have any of the accessibility, but being that there is an accessible person or a disabled person that works there now, they have to install it. So they've installed handicap push buttons on the doors in the bathroom door.
mm. And so when you run across issues like that, like, is there any outlet where you can go to voice your needs or get accommodation?
Um, so usually academically, if you have a misfortune, you would go to your disability resource center or your SDS, I don't know, just whatever disability centers at your school, you get accommodations. But this is different because I work for UF. So the disability resource center said, "My hands are tied. I can't do anything. This is not a problem of you being a student, it's you being a worker." So I found the proper avenues of raising the issue with the ADA office and the board of the College of Veterinary Medicine to voice my concerns, and then they heard me. I would say they heard me with a lowercase h because it took a whole year for them just to install push buttons to
Mm,
open the doors, right? They're like, oh, it's a big hassle, like we can't figure it out. And then they did it in like 3 days. So I think the only issue was bureaucracy and them figuring out who has to pay for it.
mm,
Um, but yeah, I would say it's just a matter of being your own advocate and going and seeking out help. Um, from what I've gathered about the world won't help you unless you ask for the help. But for the most part, people are willing to help.
mm.
So that's nice. But it's definitely a very hard pill to swallow because it's sort of almost like knock on your pride because it's like I need help and now I have to ask for help. But I mean, I'm at a point where like I'm who cares, you know? I'll ask anyone for help. Like I don't care. Even today, like at the grocery store, I was there and I needed like olive oil on the top shelf, and I was like, "Excuse me, ma'am, can you get me that olive oil?" And she was like, "Of course." And it's just stuff like that.
Yeah,
It's
it's
you need
definitely a
to
learning.
look out for
It's
yourself.
definitely a learning curve. I feel that. Like, you have to learn to look out for yourself, even like, I don't know. It's just like you said, you have to get over that pride you have of wanting to do everything yourself.
Hmm.
And a college campus really forces you to do that, forces your hand. Um, like I didn't want to start using a walker, but moving to a college campus kind of forced my hand. Um,
Hmm.
and kind of forces you to adjust
For
to
sure.
it. Um, and so that's just like getting in the building. We haven't even touched on like the course of study, but how have you found that in the lab? Is it accommodating field of study for you?
So in my lab, at least, I work my bosses are like FA researchers, so they understand FA a lot and they've like worked to make it a lot better for me. Like our building is really old and for some reason like there are two doors to get inside of the building. There are two doors to get into the bathroom. Like it's so stupid.
Mm,
And I used to be falling all the time, trying to like open one door, push my walker through, and then open the other door. And I told them, and they were like, I'll fix that, don't worry. And like they got it fixed. Um, when I told them that I like wouldn't be able to do experiments like tech with my hands like fast enough, they like hired someone that would specifically work with me so that I'd be able to get the things I need done. So like within my lab, I've definitely had like a better accessibility experience than like with the whole university.
Oh, first 2 years my PhD in my other lab, my other PI, quite frankly, didn't really care. So I'd be like, oh, it's hard to do. He's like, well, it's hard for everyone. I'm like, well, I think you're missing the point because I'm not everyone. It's a little bit more difficult for me. Like, where's your sympathy? Um, so I used to have to like do everything myself, and it would be very laborious. And then I took on a whole host of undergrads. I had like at one point 8 undergrads that were just like my minions doing all my work. I was just like delegating all
yeah.
of my workload towards them, which is it's okay. It's good for their resumes, you know. That's what I would tell myself. But now in my new lab,
Wait, tell him about how when you told your PI that you had to go and do a clinical trial, and he was like, you can't take that much
uh,
vacation.
so like it was essentially essentially I was like, oh, I have to do a clinical trial. And he's like, well, how long is it? Like a day? I was like, no, it'll probably be like 4 days. And like, that's like as short as it could possibly be because I would leave after work, go on the airplane, and then I would come back, go to
Mm,
sleep, and then go to work the next day,
yeah.
right? And he was still like, that's too many days. Like, excuse me? He was like, well, I mean, they're not considered vacation days. In the manual, they're considered days of leave. In my head, I'm like, well, guess what? You always love to compare me and my colleagues in your lab to people that work at McDonald's. That's what we'd compare us to. Well, on McDonald's, you have to work 9 to 5, so do you. I'm like, okay. Well, McDonald's or any other company, they have to abide by the ADA. So I looked up the ADA bylaws and I sent them to him. And you can request off for medical necessities. I asked for 4 days. The example was 8 weeks. So I found it quite funny. And then the conundrum was only more exasperated when I was like, oh, I want to go home for Christmas. He was like, you can't go home. You already took all these days off to go. I was like, I have not taken a single day off this
Mm,
semester. He's like, what about these 7 days? I'm like, I have to go to the doctor every one of those days. And like,
yeah.
clinical trial or not clinical trials, but research studies are typically a lot of things, right? So I would have them do all of it in one day. So it'd be like 8 a.m. to like 7 p.m. And I'm just doing everything because I didn't want to have to like miss work for more than one day. So I was trying to accommodate him, which is just crazy to look back at and think about. Versus now with my current PI, I was like, I really want to do a drug study called the TT216 or Genes Hack. Is it called? Yeah, I think
Is
it's
that the
that.
one? Is that one of them that's in New Jersey?
Yes. So it was basically like a month long,
Mm,
and he didn't even bat an eye. He was like, "Okay, do what you gotta do."
yeah.
I was like, "That's crazy." And then also, your main question was the difficulty of the dexterity and stuff. So in my new lab, now that I study Friedreich's ataxia, I applied for a grant, a diversity grant under the National Institute of Environmental and Human Toxicological Sciences, very long name, NIEHS. And they granted me the grant. And in the grant, my PI had stipulated, much like Chandra, that I would get my very own lab tech or bioscientist to help me. So now I have that person. Her name is Julia. I love Julia. And she helps me do all of my work. Yeah.
Mm. And so that's very demanding, not just on a regular person, but also with that Faye in the picture. Just plays into fatigue and things like that. And so how have you been able to deal with fatigue and the physical symptoms of FA while having such a demanding schedule in the lab?
Um, well, at least for me, the fatigue is usually physical fatigue. And as you can imagine, the work that me and Shad are doing is not physically um tiring, it's more so mentally tiring.
Mm,
So the fatigue has not played too large of a role. Um, maybe just like some days I'll like fall and then spill everything everywhere, and I'm like, then what? I'm going home. And then I go home because like I'm tired and like I need my mental health to remain intact. So I leave a little bit early or like I'll come in a little bit late. But the stuff we're doing really allows for that flexibility because our lab work, I know I said earlier, it has its own schedule. It does, but also we create the schedule. So by that I mean we create it like a few months in advance. So don't think like, oh, you create the schedule, you can just like move stuff around. No, I can't do that. But if I know about it way in advance, yes, I can do that.
Yeah.
So I'll know, oh, I don't really have to go into work today, so we can just work on the bioinformatics part of it. And so my lab is very lenient on when you need to be there, and if you need to be there, they just want you to get all your work done and to show that you're doing work. But yeah, I would say it hasn't played too large a role in terms of fatigue.
I know, like, early in my PhD, I was like, because I've always like been in the mindset to like do things as fast as I can and do them like as best I can. And like it was just really hard on my body. And like I never had migraines until I started grad school. And like there was like a 2-year period where I was just getting them like all the time, and I was going to the ER for them because they were so bad, and like no one could figure out any medicine to treat them, and it was just really bad. And I realized like probably what was like playing into it was like that I beat myself up to get up so early and go to work, and I'd push myself to get all this stuff done. And like I'd eat only after I got things done, so I wasn't like getting food when I needed food, so I'd get like hunger headaches, and
Yeah.
I'd like stay really late, and I just realized that that's not sustainable. And I started to live more so like putting my body and my health first, and like thinking like living in a way that like I want to get stuff done, but like it doesn't need to be super fast. As long as I get it done, it's better if I like focus on myself and my health. So
Mhm.
I've been doing that, and I think it's like going pretty well so far. I definitely have reduced my frequency of migraines a lot, so that's good.
Yeah,
Um,
that's good.
yeah.
And I know with my field in journalism, it's very competitive, and I'm always feeling like I have to keep up with my colleagues and with the people around me. And sometimes it can be frustrating when, like, for example, I can't get stories out as fast as the next man, or I feel like I'm at a disadvantage because of FA. So in the in research and in genetics, do you ever feel like there's any way you're lacking in how you contribute, or do you feel like you're able to keep up with your colleagues?
So being that I now have a lab tech on top of undergrads that I also still have, I would say am able to keep up. I would say our field of work is different than yours in the sense that since we are so far on the edge of human knowledge, right? We're on the very edge. There isn't a lot of people that are at our throats there with us, right? So really we can take our time to do things because also you don't want to do things hastily. We want to do things correctly and we want to do them in the best statistically most relevant way. So there isn't this cutthroat sense, but I imagine if you were like a PI or something, you would get that sense of urgency if you had to apply for grants. But the only urgency that I get is I research FA, and I'm like, wow, I want to find out what I can about it immediately because, like, what the heck, like it's a bad thing. But I would say for the most part, we can keep up, or rather, I can keep up. I'm sure Chandra can as well. Uh, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I also wanted to say like it's very like being in grad school is very different than undergrad because like in your first year you're in classes, so you maybe feel like you're competing with people in a way. But then after that, like you go on to do your own research and like it's kind of like you and your project, like you're not competing with anyone else because you're the only one with that project.
Mm.
So you like don't feel that like that sense of like, okay, like I'm not doing as much as these other people because it's like apples and oranges. Um, but like I did feel that, I guess, in first year when we did have classes, like the people in my cohort would be studying so much. Like they'd go and do their day of research and then be studying like all night. And I just like realized at that point I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna aim to pass because in grad school passing is a B. Like you can't get a C. So I was like, I'm just gonna aim to get a B in my classes. If I get an A, that's great. But like just getting through is the goal. And like that's so different than when I was in undergrad. Like if I ended up with a B in something, I'd cry. So like yeah, it was a very different mindset, but like I had to I had to convert myself to that mindset to like protect my health, if that makes sense.
Mm, yeah. And in college with FA, there's a lot of ways you have to adapt both physically and mentally. And so both of you have been in this for a very long time. But what are some of the main takeaways and ways you've been able to grow over the years in college, would you say?
So I feel like over the years I've really changed in that when it started, I was very focused on like just getting a treatment for FA, and I was like, that's like what I'm focused on. And as I learned more about genetics and about FA and everything, like being a patient also, I was like in both communities and I realized how much of a gap there was between patients and like the research world. And I realized like how much of like a gift that I have to be in both worlds and to be able to help translate information for the patient community. And so I feel like I really grew in that sense of like trying to, rather than just like hoping to get the most knowledge possible and um do something with science to get like treatments, I realized that like science has so many other more or so many other uses than what I'd like originally planned for. And I started doing a lot of that in like my volunteer stuff and after work. And like I've really like become very fond of doing that stuff. And I think that's what I'm ultimately looking to do for a career. So
And
it's
so,
changed a lot.
yeah, we talked about the approval of OMAV and the hope that that gives you, but um, how do you feel about the progress in FA research, and what do you think is a path forward after this first approval?
Um, I feel like the landscape of FI research has changed so much from when I was first diagnosed. Um, like I remember way back then, like looking at the pipeline, I was diagnosed when I was 12, so it was like 13 years ago. Um, and all the treatments for FA that they were testing were like they were trying to look for things that could possibly deal with the damage downstream. So for example, like if you think of FA like a cooking fire, that's like lit the house on fire. All these treatments that they were looking at back then were things like, oh, setting out the letting off the, what is the word, like putting out the fire in the curtains, or like stopping the fire in the trash can, but like you would still have the fire raging on the stove. And if that makes sense. And like I feel like at this point we're now looking at FA treatments that are actually like directly putting out the fire on the stove, rather than dealing with the downstream things that are not ultimately going to help as much.
Mhm.
So I think it's just way more exciting. And I feel like I feel like I know that the approval of OMAV is going to help so much with getting other drugs approved, because getting to a drug approval is kind of like clearing a path in a forest. And now you've made this clear path for other drugs to just follow along and get to approval way quicker. So like we had to go through like 4 years from when the positive data of the drug came out to when it was actually approved, and we had to go through like back and forth discussions with the FDA, and like a petition that got 74,000 signatures, and people posting on social media, and like just all these different things. And now like there's a path for drugs to get approved. So I feel like it's going to make it faster and easier for other drugs to actually get approved because of this. So it's monumental, not just in that it's like a treatment that slows progression, but also that it has created a path for all these other drugs.
Mm. Yeah, it gives us so much hope. And what you guys are doing is contributing that so much. But Christian, how would you say with the approved treatment out now? How would you say that's a payoff for you personally in your work over the years?
So personally, I'm pissed because even though we got Sky Clearways approved, I was not approved by insurance, and then I was not approved again even after I appealed. I got the decision letter yesterday, and they said no again, so I'm gonna have to appeal again. And so I don't even know what your question was because I'm so irate.
I was trying to ask, like, you've been putting in the work for all these years. Like, does that make you more hopeful for the future now that you see what's possible and you see that treatment is out there?
um, it's very interesting because like we probably hinted at earlier, science in the literature is very advanced. And
Mm.
so this was a long time come, and I think like they discovered this NRF2 pathway in Friedrich's in like 2016 or 2017. And so like I was already hopeful way back when. It's very cool to see that it is at the market now. I would say yes, I am very hopeful because like what Chandra said, once you do one, you can get other, right? It's like a domino effect. You push one domino over and all the other ones are gonna start following too. So it's great that any drug for any disease gets approved, especially one for our disease, because that means that other drugs will be able to get approved quicker.
Mm. And so, just to finish it out, what would you say is a way people, our listeners, can kind of help you out or help us out in our mission to cure FA?
Well, I would say the best way is to donate to FARA or their Free Chicks Attacks Their Research Alliance, Or even better, you can donate to me and my sister's Team Crazy. I would say the reason I push that is because as a scientist, I understand it's very costly to work in a laboratory and perform all of these tests. So by raising money, you you are directly funding that research to help hopefully find another treatment or maybe even curative treatments.
Mhm.
Say that is the best way to help us. And then, of course, the other edge of the sword is knowledge, right? So just tell other people, oh, I learned about this disease called Friedreich's ataxia. Do you know about it? Have you heard about it? Because, like, at the end of the day, familiarity with a concept and open acceptance of the concept. And when you get other people talking about a problem, there's more minds that work on fixing it and more, yeah, just more people to help. So increasing our network, even if, yeah, I don't want to say even if, that's like a very good thing to do as well. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. And Chandra, how can people give to Farah?
So you can go directly on the website and donate, but also if there's like an event going on and you see someone that you're friends with that has FA or someone that you love or is in your family, and they have like a fundraiser for this event that they're doing, if you donate to that fundraiser, it'll go directly to Farah. And that's a cool way to support both the person that you love or are friends with, and also support Farah. So like Christian was saying that Team Prezi, that's like his Ride a Taxi team, which is an event for Farah. So like those donations still directly go to Farah, but you're also like showing your support for them. But I did also want to answer your question before, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So, like, I personally think that a really impactful way to help with the getting the treatments going for FA is actually advocacy. And that's something that I only really learned about and got a part of in the last couple of years. But there's a lot of different ways that you can advocate for FA research. One of those is an annual event that Farah puts on called United Against Ataxia Hill Day. And they advocate for different legislation that helps bring more research money to FA. So there's one thing called the CDMRP. And the CDMRP is like a government program in the Department of Defense that allocates research funding to like high impact, high gain research. And the way that you get grant money through the CDMRP for your disease is you have to advocate with your legislators to get your disease put on this list that qualifies for that funding. And so,
611
like,
Southwest 34th Street, Gainesville, FF.
we're good. I'll start my sentence over.
Okay.
So the CDMRP is a program by the government that the Department of Defense and the government that funds research that is high impact, high gain. And so the way that your disease is considered for funding from this program is you have to advocate with your legislators to get it on the list. So something that Farah has been focusing on in the last couple of years is getting FA on this list of eligible conditions for CDMRP funding. And so each year I've been advocating with them at this event to get FA added to the list. And 2 years ago, it was added. And so the first year that we actually like had FA on the list, $14 million of research grants went to FA, which is like a crazy amount. So, I mean, if you fundraise, like if you had the whole country fundraising, like grassroots fundraising, and you made like $3 million, that would be considered amazing. But like to get $14 million and like no one with FA really had to lift a finger. It just came from like funding that we just like asked our legislators to make us qualify for. Like that led to some really important research and lots of money to fund that research. And so like advocacy is just like a less discussed method of getting us closer to treatments, but like it's really easy and it can be really powerful. So I know that there's gonna be a United Against Ataxia Hill Day this year again too. And they haven't announced the date yet, but I believe they are soon. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking about getting involved in advocacy, you absolutely should, and you should go to this event. It's virtual. I'm definitely going to be doing it again.
I second that. That's so powerful. And wow, thank you for all you guys do in not only researching, but fundraising, advocating, and all you guys do. It's amazing. And thank you for your time to be on here and share your story as well.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting us to be here.
Yeah, of course. I'm so glad y'all were able to. And to our listeners, thank you for listening, and we will see you next episode. Okay, to wrap things up, thank you so much to Sandra and Christian again for joining us. And thank you for all of our listeners for hanging around and tuning in. And I want to thank my producer, Justice Shelby, sponsor, Justin Blue, and my coach, Billy Holbrook, for joining me and for making this all happen. If you feel led to get involved, like Sandra and Christian mentioned, you can go to curefa.org, and there's a link to sign up for a advocacy newsletter to stay up to date on all the current events and FA research and ways to get involved in advocacy. There's also links to donate and links to find out more about FA and more about the community. Also, if you're listening on YouTube, you can find a link to this episode on my blog site, noahnoah.blog, where you can find a tab for my podcast for work. You can find out more about my journalism works, and a tab for my blog posts as well. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you like what you hear, and we will be back with you soon for episode 4. Thank you for tuning in.